Hi and welcome back to Cheese Club. This month we're going to discuss our cheeses for January. So, in our box we have our lovely selection of 5 cheeses. We have our Lincolnshire Poacher, our Clara Ashed, our Baron Bigod, Oxford Blue and Morbier from France. In the box we have our lovely booklet which takes you through all the 5 cheeses, the selection of chutneys, crackers and water biscuits, as well as the Lagrima white port. As part of Cheese Club, we do a hero cheese and a hero dish for every single month, and this month we are going to use Morbier and we're going to make a lovely quiche Lorraine. So without further ado, let's crack on with our quiche Lorraine. So we'll keep it quite simple and start off with our pastry. So we are going to mix 200 grams of flour with 100 grams of butter, and we are going to slowly start bringing this together inside the mixing bowl. So what you want to try and do is make a crumble consistency between the butter and the flour, and that will slowly but surely start to come together. It'll take you about 5 to 10 minutes. As you can see, the butter and the flour is starting to come together ever so slightly. At this stage, we're going to add a little touch of salt, just to make sure it's well seasoned. And we're going to crack in 2 eggs. So what we're going to do is start mixing that together, and the pastry will start to come together nice and neat. We don't want to mix this pastry too much. If we mix it too much, it becomes too dry and too hard, and you don't have that nice short crumb that you want to generate when baking. You'll end up with a little chewy pastry that you won't get that lightness from. So now that we have this dough come together, we're going to wrap it in a little bit of cling film and we're going to leave it in the fridge for half an hour. This will firm up the pastry ever so slightly so that we can work with it a little bit better. So while the pastry is resting, let's start looking at the filling. So we are going to start slicing a few shallots. We'll pop the stove on and get that nice and warm while we're slicing the shallots. We can be quite rustic with this because it is a rustic dish. So nice and fine. What we're going to do is we're going to saute these inside the pan till they start to go a little bit translucent. This will break down so that in the quiche it won't be nice and firm. While that's happening, we'll start to prepare a few of our other elements. So we'll slice down our spring onions. Okay, so now that the onions are starting to saute down, we're going to add in a little bit of sliced pancetta or sliced smoked bacon, and we'll start to cook that down ever so slightly and get a little bit of colour on it. The reason I use smoked bacon rather than pancetta in this specific one is because I actually quite like the rich, strong flavour and the salty flavour that I get from the smoked bacon. I prefer that to the pancetta. I think the pancetta is beautiful, but I think it's a little bit not British enough, ultimately. I need that big punchy flavour coming through from the smoked bacon. So that's starting to cook down there. While that's happening, we'll start to cut down our Morbier cheese. So Morbier cheese, a 45% fat cow's milk cheese from the east of France, from the Jura region. It's a minimum 2-month-old cheese. This one here is made in 2 different batches. So they make a batch in the morning with the morning milk, and then they make a batch in the evening with the evening milk. But in between, what they'll do is they'll ash one of the layers of the first batch. And as you'll see here running through, you'll see this dark line that comes through the middle of the cheese. Now this is the ash. So traditionally they'd have done it in 2 batches. Now they don't, they just ash it and stick it together. But they still try and stick to the traditional format of this amazing, smelly French cheese. So, while that's happening, what we'll do is we'll continue to sweat this down, okay? And get a slow caramelisation. Now that the pastry's been resting in the fridge for the last half an hour, I'm going to bring out some, roll it out, and then put it into our tart case and start the blind baking process. We'll stick that to the side. So here we've got a little bit of pastry that we did earlier on. But what we'll do is we're going to roll it out and I'm going to show you the thickness that we need to be for our tart case. So, we'll put a little bit of flour on the bench. Pastry out. A little bit of flour on top of that as well. We'll turn that heat right down. And a little bit of flour on the pin. We'll start to roll this out. About the thickness of a pound coin is the exact size you're looking for. Okay? So don't be shy putting a little bit of pressure on this as well while you're at it. What we'll do is we'll pop this into a non-stick tray all around. We'll lift it onto the pin, put the tray down, and then we'll slowly pop that onto there. What we'll do is we'll start to crimp in. So we need to push it right into all the little gaps. This is the best thing about a tart when you make your own pastry. Once you get it in there and get it in one go without any of the cracks, it's a mission achieved on its own. So what we'll do is just start to trim some of the outside of this off. I like to leave a little bit on, so when I bake it in the oven, once I've blind baked it, I can shave some of it off so it doesn't start to shrink. So, get rid of the excess pastry. Give this a little stir. As you'll see here, it's starting to caramelise and get a little bit of colour. That's what we want so we can get all this flavour into the quiche. All that darkness off the bottom of the pan. That's going to give you all that excess flavour. So, with our tart case, what we're going to do is we're going to cut a little cartouche. Say a little one, probably a big one. A cartouche is basically a circle of paper, greaseproof paper, that we're going to pop in the top. And then we're going to fill with our baking beans. In this case, I'm going to use yellow split lentils. And then I'm going to pop this in the oven and blind bake it. So, in we go. This should take roughly 15 minutes. What we'll do is we'll bring it out and then we'll line it with a little bit of egg and pop it back in for another 5, and that'll make a little shield between the pastry and the filling so it stays nice and crisp. Now that the pastry's in the oven baking, we're going to start looking at the egg mix for the filling. So we're going to take our mix of cream and eggs, and we're going to add a tiny little bit of salt. We're going to start cracking the eggs in individually, and then what we're going to do is we're going to mix this all together with a fork or a whisk, and this is going to give us our Royale mix. So you can add a few extra if you want. It'll become super, super light. But after it cools, it sinks right down and becomes really dense. So it's really nice and warm if you add a few extra eggs in. If you want it to be a little bit firmer, you can do. I like to stick with 6 eggs and a litre of cream. I've aimed this dish for specific occasions. In the spring or the summer, you can use it for a picnic. I like to use it for an afternoon tea for Mother's Day, but I also kind of like to use it in between Christmas and New Year so that I've got something with the leftovers. I've always kind of got bacon and onions kicking about from leftovers from Christmas. So I'll make this mix up and make a quiche and it'll last me a couple of days. But for a nice little occasion, Mother's Day is probably the best one. Now that we've mixed all this in together, what we're going to do is just going to reserve that to the side. Okay? We're going to have a little look at the tart case and see if it's ready to come out of the oven. So as you can see here, it's starting to firm up around the outsides. But what we're going to do is we're going to take the baking beans off. Just pop them to the side. and then we'll pop it back into the oven for another 2 or 3 minutes just to get a little bit of crispiness on that. And then we'll put a little shield made with egg on top of it. Okay, so now that our pastry is almost ready, what we're going to do is we're going to make this little shield with a little touch of egg yolk. And we're just going to brush it all over the tart. And what this does is it goes back in the oven and dries out, but it makes a little shield between the pastry, which you want to stay firm and crisp, and the actual egg filling that goes on top. Because if we don't have that shield, then what will happen is once the egg is cooking inside the egg mix for the actual quiche itself, it will start to leak into the pastry and it will get wet and it won't sit. So we're going to pop this back into the oven just to seal off. It'll only take another minute and a half. So, Morbier, why did I choose this cheese? I chose it because it smells amazing, it tastes unbelievable, and I'm a massive lover of French cheese. So I think at the moment, we're kind of lucky to get our hands on quite a lot of cheeses at the moment under the current circumstances. So I wanted to showcase Morbier to you pretty much before we struggle to get a mass amount of French cheese into Britain over the next wee while. So I'm probably in the future going to look at a lot of British cheeses, but for now I want to focus on Morbier. It has this great flavour, this great consistency and depth to it. So it's a traditional rennet cheese. As I said before, 45% fat, so it's very, very, very rich. Has a consistency of kind of leather and wax, but it's a very smooth tasting cheese. Strong smell, matches really, really well with Morteau sausages and garlic and a little bit of pork and stuff like that. Has a lovely fresh smell to it, but it is a little bit pungent on the outside. I think this cheese is a perfect cheese for a quiche Lorraine. It's from Jura. They focus there on pork. So yeah, an outstanding cheese. Strong cheese. Very, very, very strong cheese. So let's get our tart case out. What we're going to do here is we're going to let this cool, and then we're going to shave the sides off, and then we're going to start to build our tart. Okay, so now that our tart case is ready to go, what we're going to do is we're going to start layering everything up in the tart. So we're going to start off with our pancetta and onions, or our bacon and onions that you can see here are nice and crispy. Loads of caramelised flavour in there. So we're just going to spread that about, not too much. An even distribution, so we'll get all the flavour to the whole way around it. So pop that in there. Some pre-sliced spring onions that we did earlier on, just pop them in. Make sure they're nice and spread out. I first learned to do this dish when I worked in a French brasserie, probably about 10 or 12 years ago. Lovely little small place, everything traditionally French. Probably learned everything there is to do with French cooking while I was in there. Loved it, great little place. We got to witness and taste some amazing foods. So this is why I'm bringing this to you today, just to make sure that you can get to sample some outstanding produce in a very simplistic, relaxed manner. So, Morbier cheese. We'll take a big chunk, we'll take the skin off because it doesn't melt too well. We pop that skin in here, it'll just stand out like a sore thumb. So we're just going to roughly chop this up. Keep it pretty rustic. And then we'll just start spreading it all over the quiche. When this bakes, it will start to melt and leave big chunks inside the quiche. Probably put a little bit more in there just to be sure. Let's not be shy because it is an outstanding cheese. Let's just spread that about. So what we're going to do here is we've got our Royale mix that we pre-made before, and we're going to pour that over the top. Just make sure it goes all in all the little nooks and crannies, and that will get everything filled so it all cooks evenly. So as you can see here, I'm just kind of moving about everywhere just taking my time to fill all the gaps so there's no air bubbles. You don't want to come right to the top because it's going to souffle up and it'll burst over the top when it's baking. So just keep it there. And then what we'll do, we'll finish with another little touch of salt. Not a great lot. And then we'll pop that in the oven to bake. So our quiche is nearly ready. It's been in the oven for almost 30 minutes, so we're going to bring it out, let it rest, and then we'll cut a nice little portion. Oh, look at that. So as you can see, we've got this lovely caramelised colour on the top and the freshness coming through from the spring onions, and it'll be absolutely bunged full of flavour inside there. So what we'll do is we'll pop it on the rack and we'll let it rest so it gets nice and cool. So our quiche has been sitting here resting for the last 20 minutes. It started to come down in size a little bit after souffling up, so it's just primed and ready to go. It's just warm enough to eat fresh. So what we're going to do is just going to pop this out the tray nice and gently. This is the point at which I'll absolutely wreck it. And there we have it. A lovely little fresh quiche Lorraine. So thank you for joining us here today for our second instalment of our Cheese Club. This has been our quiche Lorraine, and I hope to see you next month.